So anyway, long story short, my wife did this period. We did 3 months of the Speedball, calf stimulation, isometric holds, and she's a hard ass. She was doing it 6 days a week, 6 3-minute rounds of Speedball, a little bit of a bodyweight circuit with the isometric stuff in there, and then the calf and foot stuff every day. And ironically, at 37 or 38 years of age, after two kids, she came out with no running. We think we had 3 running sessions, and she ran a lifetime best or equal lifetime best for a flying 10-meter time.
That was Angus Ross, and you're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. If there's one thing that has completely changed my approach to supplementation, it's been finding performance herbalism. Herbalism is different than your typical supplements, particularly because herbalism works by harnessing the power of nature. It involves using tried and tested, high-grade, well-sourced herbal compounds to make a difference in your energy, strength, boost your hormonal system, and improve your overall vitality. That's what today's sponsor, Lost Empire Herbs, can bring to you. Whether it's through Shilajit resin, which has been highly recommended by many coaches for improved strength, mushroom tinctures for immune support, combination packages such as the Phoenix formula, which is one of my favorites, Lost Empire Herbs has the supplements that will help you in achieving your performance training goals. If you want to check out some of my favorite herbs, you can head to lostempireherbs.com/justfly and use the code JOEL15 at checkout. That's JOEL15 at checkout for 15% off. Lost Empire Herbs is a great company, and I hope you get a chance to check them out. Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I appreciate you being here. I'm excited to welcome Angus Ross back to the show. Angus is a former Winter Olympian. He works for High Performance Sport New Zealand, has a PhD in exercise physiology, and Angus is an expert in all things speed and power. He has a heavy focus on track and field, and he also works with many other Olympic sports and Olympic individuals, including those in cycling, skeleton, squash, rowing, tennis, and more. The sport of track and field, as well as the decathlon and heptathlon, so the multi-events within track and field, have a lot that we can learn from when it comes to general physical preparation for athletes. Angus will be talking about the multi-event athletes, those decathletes and heptathletes, and some of the things that we can learn from looking at what it takes to be good at a wide range of events. So Angus will be getting into that. He'll also be talking about the role of the speed bag, neural wiring, and firing speed and its effect on sprint training. He'll be talking a lot about isometrics and elasticity, electrical stimulation, as well as a lot of case studies and anecdotes and ways to put this information together in a practical format. It's always fantastic talking to Angus. It was great to have him on the show again. Let's get to episode 401 here. Yeah, it is. I will say, watching decathletes high jump, they actually lack a lot of the kind of the real turning power. They kind of are a little more linear versus that, like a good high jumper gets that like internal rotation of the swing leg and gets the twist all. They're just a little more twisty in the takeoff, if that makes sense. Whereas I find at least decathletes seem to be a little more sagittal. And I wonder if it's because I think we had talked about this. I had done like some sort of data plot. I don't even know the statistical. Stats was the worst part of my master's, by far, was the worst part of my master's work. I plugged it into something, but it was like the correlation between decathletes, and if you were really good at javelin, you tended to actually be a little worse at the 100. And I'm sure there's the person who's good at both, but like for the most part.
100%. There are those relationships. I totally agree.
Yeah.
High jumpers, jabs seem to go together. High jumpers, 100-meter runners don't go together very well either.
Yeah.
And it's like, do you train the slow stretch shortening cycle thing on there? I'll write some notes down. That was one thing I was sort of thinking about. That there are, and a lot of the, you don't see too many guys in the high jump that can run 10-2, do you?
No.
They're just not that sort of. And you think fiber type wise, why can't they? They probably should be. They're probably obviously explosive. I was actually watching. We had I think not a gold level meet. It must have been a bronze level meet in New Zealand on the weekend. We had a Japanese guy out here, and I was watching him high jump. He jumped 227, I think. He must have been, he was up to here. I mean, he must have been like 5'9" or 10, with short legs and a long back. All the wrong traits you would have thought. He jumped 227. I was like, and his PB is like 231, I think. Cannon of a takeoff leg. I was like, I wanted to run out there and biopsy the guy. Like, what the hell's going on in his leg? Like, yeah, crazy how some, but but he ran in this really languid in the last 3 steps. But yeah, I've eventually said what he would do in some other tests, like, and is he fast? But he could just jump, like, unbelievable. Impressive to watch.
Yeah.
A little guy there. It's cool, very cool.
Yeah, with that, I actually have been following a lot of like Japanese jumpers on Instagram and social media, just because it is amazing, like you said. And it's funny because you go back in time in history and you look at like the triple jump. I think the best triple jumpers, or a lot of them in like the 20s or 30s, were Japanese. And so there's something about that jumping in that. Even reading about like the samurais who jumped over like the growing grass in the fall, or the growing tall grass throughout the fall and stuff like that.
I'm sure you've seen that guy. There's a guy on Instagram that jumps over tissue boxes and stuff and forward and backwards. A Japanese guy, unbelievable height. Like, I had a look at this and stuff the other day. I thought, it's insane. Like, just like he's shot out of a cannon. Like it. So very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, it is, like you said. I like following that too, because it's almost like a different like frame of mind in some senses. Like that guy you mentioned, there's a lot of creativity that I think ordinarily we wouldn't just necessarily pin to training. So like just seeing his creative process is really cool. But I almost feel like outside of all the characters I can't understand, it seems like there's just a different, almost a spirit of things. The way they do things is a little different, like culturally, and trying to kind of get a feel for that. Because like you said, like there are some really bouncy dudes who have really poor levers for jumping that you would, if you saw them walking down the street, you'd be like, you have no business being a 225. There's no way you could ever jump 225 and high jump.
That's exactly what I thought. I was watching this guy. I was like, the hell? Maybe he's taller than he looks. And so I walked over to the edge of the apron, just stand beside him, and he wasn't taller than he looked. He was not tall. He must have been jumping, I would say he's 1.70 m something tall, and he was jumping 227, and his PB is 231. It's like, that's got to be pretty close to Stefan Holm's height over head world record. Like he's, insane. So,
yeah, it would be interesting. Like you think about, like there's lots of contributions to movement. Of course, there's muscle and tendons. And you have the connective tissue and fascia and all this stuff. And it's like, well, where are neural quality, nervous system firing? Like what is the thing here? Like there was that, there was about 3 or 4 years ago, it was a Japanese high jumper, I believe, who did like a depth jump from a 6-foot box and did a rebound and was pretty bouncy. And I don't think it was said at the time, this is a high jumper whose PB is XYZ. And I think I looked it up. I was like, wow, this guy's like a 228 high jumper, like a 7.6 high jumper. Of course, makes
so
sense.
Legit good. Yeah.
With the jumping, track and field, I know we'll be getting into the decathlon and things like that. I found it really interesting. Before we pushed record, you were telling me a little bit about your new exploits in rowing and like the world records in rowing versus the track records and the elasticity with that. I just thought that was interesting. If you want to mention that again with what you're up to there and the degradation of rowing versus elastic type movements.
Yeah. So I had a knee surgery 6 months ago, and I was sort of not able to do some of the more elastic sprinting, running, jumping stuff that I'd probably prefer to be able to do. But being still relatively enamored with the speed power side of things, I started looking at rowing and looking at the concept of, I worked with the rower and started looking at some of the world records in the short sprints on the Concept 2 rowing rig, and they've got a whole web page with world rankings on them for every age group you can think of. So, and it just intrigued me that the world record for a absolute world record, something like 12.5 for 100-meter rowing, and the world record for a 63-year-old or whatever it is, it goes down to still doing 14.1 or 14.2, and so less than 2-second difference. And the contra to it, if you map the degradation of a 63-year-old running 100 meters, I think the world record might be something like 13 seconds or whatever it is, and so the degradation from 9.58 in the 100 meters to 13 plus is a lot more, certainly even in seconds, but even percentage wise, even more so than the 100-meter rowing rig. And it made me think that there's a obviously strength is probably better maintained than the elastic power that is required in sprint running when you're bouncing off the ground. And perhaps that whole piece of for healthy aging and trying to maintain qualities that you have, that piece, fiber type isn't degraded as much as the original paper said. And there's certainly, as I alluded to you before, we know with masters sprinters, there's a couple of papers coming out of Scandinavia where they talk about their stride rate is pretty much maintained. You might have a 65-year-old guy that's still turning over at 4.5 strides a second, which is relatively close to world class. But his stride length might have gone from 2 meters 40 as a 25-year-old to a meter 75 or whatever, and all of a sudden he's running 3 seconds slower than 100 meters or whatever it is. I just think it's interesting how these different qualities degrade at different rates, and in terms of trying to maintain, your athleticism, probably that elasticity, ability to bounce is probably something that we should be thinking about. We all talk about, strength and fiber type and sarcopenia and all these things with aging, but one of the things that probably is a little different is the fascial tendon piece, the elasticity piece, which I don't think it's talked about as much, and it's probably not researched as much in general terms, let alone with aging. So that is an interesting area. Sure.
Yeah, I know it's like the whole static stretching, how much should we stretch thing is kind of mixed, depending on probably group too, maybe by age group or whatever. But it does seem that the people who are still super bouncy later, like Kadir Ziani, and we were talking about that a little bit before as well, like that guy's super flexible, and you feel like, well, it's definitely not hurting him, and so you think, no. I mean, I do know like fast twitch muscle is more like elastic by nature than slow twitch is from what I've heard, but I'm sure with him, it's got to be a lot more than just that, because that's always been that mobility, dynamic mobility has been an important part of his practice. So I'm curious what you think about that, like especially for athletes who are, as they're starting to get a little bit older, and dynamic mobility or flexibility or static stretching, any of those things.
Yeah, look, I think there's a whole continuum of stuff there, and the Kadir Ziani piece is fascinating. That a guy, 5'10" or whatever he is, still dunking at 50 something, after snapping his Achilles and all the rest of it. Incredible. Look, I think it is something we lose. We seem to get stuck in these patterns that we get accustomed to. I think it is a really important piece, and I think how you do it, how you best do it, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about the isometric holds and stuff like that, and I think that aligns quite nicely with stretching. But I would sort of, my guess is, yes, you want the range, yes, you want to do some static stretching, but you need to do some elastic stuff through range, whether it's leg swings, jumping, whatever, bouncing, iso lunges in a bouncing posture, force absorption, all those pieces. I think there's a continuum of work that needs to be done. But certainly the Kadir Ziani, I bought his book actually.
Same here.
Probably a year. Yeah, and it's kind of like, wow, it's full on, and it's an interesting piece of work, and his mobility is next level. So really interesting.
Yeah, it is one of those postures out of the book. I forget which one it was, but it reminds me of some stuff I used to do for high jump mobility back in the day, basically where you're like kneeling, but your feet are in plantar flexion. So your toes are pointed backwards.
Oh, yeah.
And then basically, like, I used to just sit like that and lean backwards, like a reverse Nordic, and I remember when I was 18 doing that, just as kind of a high jump type thing. And it was easy. And then I started trying it again in my mid 30s, and I hadn't done it in years. And like, you're not going to point your toes that hard, that far in sport movement. But at the same time, it's just, I guess, thinking about like the whole fascial train, like that whole front line, like, man, something not great has happened there. And so even this past week, I moved my kids' gymnastics bar to the basement, because it was in like next to the TV room. It's kind of causing a mess. So I just put it in the basement, and now I use it probably more than they do, at least for the time being. But I was just doing stuff where, this bar is sitting at about belly button height, chest height, and I'll just hang back off it into that reverse Nordic and stuff like that, and kind of do a lot of like assisted. And I'm like, man, this feels really good. I don't know what the literature says about this, but it was kind of like loaded. Like you said, it's not just hanging out. There's a load to it. And that felt really good. Like, I feel like that's something I've been missing
almost
for a long time. All
of his work is stretching through that. The big toe, the plantar fascia, the foot, the Achilles, the whole chain is put under load. And I feel like he is maintaining that stuff better than 99.9% of the population, and like, wow, he can still fly. Like it's very interesting.
Yeah, I guess maybe the happy medium is no matter where you sit on the static stretching or flexibility, loaded mobility in those ranges is certainly a good thing, especially as you kind of go through your athletic journey. I think it might have been, I think it was Bill Hartman who had said it. Maybe you did as well, but something to the tune of like our fascia, our connective tissue starts to dry out as we age. Like inherently, right? Yeah. And like, I wonder what outside of like a loaded stretching, and I think even with fascia, like fascia goes hand in hand with like therapeutic things, even like stress and all that stuff, right? Like things you just naturally take on, and like even emotions probably, people who seem to be great athletically longer in life seem to have like a very positive countenance, at least as far as I've seen. So, I'd be curious at like the quality of those tissues. Do you have any other thoughts with like, outside of the loaded stretching piece?
I think you're right. I think there's a whole area there which hasn't really been tapped into well. I know. There is data on the compliance and the elasticity of tissue. They become more viscous, which is probably aligns to that hydration piece in terms of the fascial stuff. It becomes more viscous as we age, but I haven't seen training studies of what if we take these masters athletes, we make sure we monitor their hydration status, we do all these elastic type exercises. Can we modify it back to a more youthful sort of structure? I don't know. I suspect you can. Maybe not all the way back, but I suspect you can. It's trainable like most things. That the elasticity and stiffness piece, we know that changes with younger athletes. You can change that with different types of training. Will change the tendon qualities. So why wouldn't you be able to do it as we age? And it's just people don't, or it hasn't been researched. But I suspect you can.
Yeah. One thing. Yeah, you're right. It is so complex, right? Like you have a few different bubbles of possibilities on what impacts that connective tissue. I mean, it's probably, I would imagine too, you have different like high level performers in masters track, 30s, 40s, 50s, and maybe there's a different reason, or different nuance to what they did and how they were so good for so long.
Yeah. Absolutely.
With what you were saying too, you actually got me thinking. With the like the loaded stretching, and this is, I believe, I have a question or two related to this later on. But like some of Jay Schrader's training methods, which I know you've studied and been around people who have utilized those. One of the ones I was probably in my mid-30s when someone introduced me to this. I mean, this was one of the more difficult. I guess you call it a warm up. Like it was like the first exercise. It's like exercise 1. Get in a iso lunge. Now every 5 seconds do a Russian lunge jump for 2 minutes. So that was like 24 Russian lunge jumps. And then you get a couple of minutes to do the other leg. And I mean, I was dying. I mean, I'm like minute 38, man. I'm like, I don't know if these would really count as jumps, but I tell you, after I recovered from that, so like, 3, 4, 5 minutes, I'm like, man, I'm feeling pretty good. Like I'm feeling pretty bouncy now. Yeah. Like there's something about, maybe it's like the blood flow too, like the time, blood flow, stretch loaded, some mix in that chemistry set. I don't know what it did, but that kind of got me thinking about that as well, like kind of combining modalities with the loaded.
Yeah, it's some sort of potentiation going on there, whether it's nervous system, muscular, blood flow, elasticity piece, and I remember reading a thing from Keith Barr talking about tendons and when he was trying to fill a tendon, essentially to uptake collagen, that you wanted to stretch it and then relax it. So it was sort of almost like a sponge. It was sucking stuff back into it. Are you helping with the hydration of it by doing the iso lunge, which is relatively, it's a hypoxic sort of, you're in this sort of isometric position, but then the jump, you're actually essentially releasing it for a while. There's a bit of rehydration. I don't know. I mean, who knows? There's a multitude of things could be going on there.
Yeah. It makes me want to try it now with like some BFR cuffs or something like that to see if that even, like
does it make it worse or better? Well, who knows?
Yeah. I don't know if I'll go 2 minutes if I put those things on, but
no, I don't think your jumps will be particularly high either after a couple 30 seconds of that.
No. I mean, I'll have to do a video if I do it though, just for entertainment purposes. I something was in my head before and I kind of lost it, but it came back. And this goes back to, again, something we were talking about prior, is the rotational versus the glide shot put in track. And we were talking about the decathletes and how like a lot of them are gliders, and you wouldn't think so because they're like decathletes. They're super skilled. They should be able to be rotational. And But in thinking, it's like, well, okay, they have a lot of events that are more sagittal in nature. Like you got 100, 400, like it's more sagittal than it is rotational. Like you're not doing these big rotational, they're smaller, quicker ones at like long jump, even the hurdles. And so I wonder, it's like almost like this bandwidth of the totality of what to be good almost maybe steers you into that a little bit more. But I guess for nothing else, there's that kind of like a thought experiment for training for any sport with those qualities in mind, with what the sport demands. But then what I wanted to specifically ask you was like rotational shot putters versus like linear, like what I'd be curious what like a rotational shot putter would be good at, or what their tendencies are. Like if you worked with them in the gym or for playing other sports and things like that, versus someone who was a glider and like even like lifting numbers in the gym. Any thoughts on like general differences between people who are rotational shot putters and gliders?
But I probably haven't worked with him enough to know. I mean, certainly I've worked with some rotational throwers. I've worked with one world-class glider. But yeah, I think, there's probably the original gliders were, big, fast, strong, super athletic, and these sort of linear terms. They got a good 30, good jumps. The Werner Gunters of the world, they're super athletes. And I guess, and they tend to be big. The good ones, you don't see, a 6-foot guy that's a glider that is a world-class shot putter. Really, you do once. There's one or two back in the day, but in general terms, and when they were those guys back in the day, they were unbelievably explosive. I think Al Feuer back in the day from the 70s from the States. I've heard stories about his vertical jump was like insane. Over a meter vertical jump, and so he compensated for being 6 foot tall or whatever by being unbelievably explosive. So I think those traits, you have to be a mega athlete in some respects to be a glider and be competitive. I think you get a bit more impulse time with the rotational shot. It's a bit more of a skill component to learn it. I think it's a more difficult skill to learn, and which probably lends itself to the whole decathlon piece. I think we've got 10 events. I've only got 10% of my time to spend on shot put or less. I want to do the nuts, and they tend to be really good athletes, world-class athletes. So, okay, I can still throw the shot 15 meters with a glide. That'll do. I'm not going to get enough points getting to 16.5 meters that's going to make it worthwhile to spend 20% of my time on the rotational stuff, perhaps. That said, they are more aligned in terms of physique terms to a rotational thrower. There's not too many 6'7" decathletes that are World Cup, but there are some. Obviously, let's not neglect them. There are some of the best in the world right now are 6'7" or more. But most of them are, 6'2", 6 foot to 6'3", and that probably would lend itself to that gliding, the rotational physique, improve their impulse time. But I think the trade-off in time is probably the real issue, that it takes a long time to learn it well. And then if you've only got 3 throws, you failed the first 2. What do you do then? It's difficult.
If you're a coach looking for an awesome training portal to distribute and track workouts for athletes online or in person, then you can get a free 30-day trial of TeamBuilder software by heading to teambuilder.com and using the code JUSTFLY. See what TeamBuilder can do for you and sign up for that free trial today using the code JUSTFLY. Yeah. The impulse time is interesting. I almost wonder if it's almost like there's a standard impulse time too, in a way, like this fast impulse. And it's like if you do rotational, you kind of are going, because like a discus is, I don't want to make this talk too much about track. Like my track, like kind of nerding out hats coming out a little bit. I was just curious, it's just a fundamentally interesting question. And I think the average athlete, like the average team sport athlete, basketball, football, whatever, they're never going to get so specialized in those movements outside their sport that it's probably going to matter. But just to me, it interests me in like linear sprinting, like how much, tuning other things you're doing. If you want to be as fast in the straight line as you can humanly be, like you need to have rotational qualities, absolutely. But what if you what if you like went so far, like if you're...
Yeah, I don't know. It's a good question. And it's sort of bringing it back to the decathlon angle. The decathletes tend to run with a big stride length relative to their height.
That's true.
Which is interesting. They seem to be, they almost bound down the track. And I think Kevin Meyer takes something like 42 steps to run it, or used to.
Steps, yeah.
It just bounds down the track and still runs 10:50, like that. Okay. So whether there is more of a rotational element because they do these multiplanar movements in these different sports. They throw three throwing events. I'm not sure, but and then there's that whole the stretch shortening cycle piece. We know that there's a specificity between fast and slow stretch shortening cycle elements. Like we sort of talked to offline before about high jumpers don't tend to be great 100-meter runners, and the contact time to be a good high jumper is whatever it is, 180 milliseconds on takeoff versus 90 milliseconds for a good sprinter. Do those two marry up very well? Not often, and quite often you see, the best decathlete high jumper is not the best 100-meter runner.
Yeah,
despite both of them requiring fast twitch muscle, there's something in the wiring. If you've done lots and lots of high jump, and maybe it compromises your time on the ground, your speed. I'm not sure it's the rotational thing. I tend to think, or maybe it is. Maybe you over-rotate, as you say. Maybe, and it's, I guess, and I know we've talked before about the spinal engine piece and how that's a factor. And I certainly don't think you want to coach, if we do go down that spinal engine road, the excessive rotation.
Yeah.
You want to train the elements. It's too fast. And train the elements, train range, train strength, train elasticity, and then let the body do its thing. The body will figure it out. I think us trying to, oh no, you need to do this, is a mistake. I think it's got to be have those components and then let the body self-organize and it'll come to the fore.
Yeah, 100% for sure. I've actually been down that road. I remember there was one week I was running like with a not a water bag but a water bell that I was holding in front, and I felt so much rotational torque running with that thing. I was like, this is amazing. And then I started timing myself, and I always go through these before I start giving them out in athletic programs. And what I found was, I had a ton of torque, but it was actually so much that when I ran without the bell, my times actually didn't really get faster. and so it's like, too much of a good thing, way too much of a good thing. Body didn't need that much. And so that's what kind of got me thinking too about like the decathletes and like if it's so rotational and how that fits with the linear. I was going to say as well, have you heard of like with the high jump and the speed is intriguing too, because that's something that if you would have asked me 15 years ago, I would have said, oh yeah, if you're going to be a good jumper off one leg, well, you should be as fast as you humanly can, because the faster that 100 gets, the faster you're. And it wasn't you who had said like Sotomayor. I think it was you who told me this, like Javier Sotomayor. It was something like someone had ran a 200, world record holder in high jump, of course. Someone had ran a 200 and it was like, I don't know, 21 something. And he was like, too fast. That's too fast for a high jump. It's like, what?
Yeah. True story. It was a New Zealand guy that he was talking to, who was like a 7-foot high jump, 7'1" high jumper. And he'd made this analogy that, that's too fast. And it's like, what does that mean? And it's kind of interesting because we had another guy in my athletic club that was a 7-foot high jumper. And he could only run a 12-second 100. But his first 30 was unbelievable. Like he would get out with all the 10-5 guys. He'd be with them or ahead of them at 30 meters and then just blow up. And it made me think about that whole, he was, and the ground contact times obviously are a big, 350 milliseconds out of the blocks, 200 milliseconds, 190 milliseconds, blah, 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 all in that sort of high jump range for that first 10, 20 meters, in terms of if he had trained that sort of impulse time. But once he got down the track, when they get down to everyone else is doing 90 milliseconds, he's now still doing them at 120 milliseconds because that's his bandwidth. Perhaps that's part of it, and training that really high speed stuff, despite fiber type wise that being appropriate, maybe fascially, elastically, it's not appropriate. I'm not sure. But it's certainly an interesting puzzle. Yeah,
with that, have you seen it was a decathlete, I think in the late 80s, early 90s, Christian Schenk was his name. He was German. Yeah,
he won the 88 Olympics. Yeah. Straddler. Was he a straddler?
Yes. Straddle high jump 7.5 or 222, but then his 100 meters wasn't very good. It's like...
Yeah. He's the, I actually looked at that back in the day. He's the he had the slowest 100 time in the top 8, and he won the decathlon, and that never happens. Yeah. Almost never happens. But he jumped. I think it was 227. He jumped. Yeah,
crazy. He's a tank, big guy, too. But his shot put was like insane. He would have, if he was in the United States, he would have played football 100%, American football. Like I probably wouldn't even seen the track too much.
Massive impulse, but his his sort of rate stuff was perhaps a bit limited. I'm not sure, but certainly interesting.
Yeah. It's so interesting to try to pick why that is. And one thing I noticed that I do think it's interesting, I feel like I see it a little bit more in female high jumpers. And maybe it's because maybe relative to men, they actually get even more out of their structure. They really work their structure and elasticity, maybe even more than their male counterparts. And it seems like a lot of them, I see this in Mahucic, who she's getting somewhat close to the world record, but she, the whole time her feet are like in dorsiflexion. Whereas if you sprint in the early swing to mid swing, you're still plantar flexed. But it's like she's dorsiflexed the whole time because just to rock that vertical impulse like crazy. Yeah. And I'm like,
she's almost got a bounding run up too, doesn't she? Just sort of bounds around the bend.
Yeah, like a bounding dorsiflex run. And to me, it's so interesting to see this because I think, track coaches love dorsiflex everything. It's like, well, to be really fast in the 100, you're not going to do that the whole time. Well, but then wait, high jump, and maybe this is what you're trying to get at with the vertical impulse. And you want to see someone who dorsiflexes the whole time. Here's someone who's not very fast, Mahucic, but she can jump out of the gym. So it's just interesting to see those, like those specializations.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I guess on that, I talked at a high jump sort of mini conference we had in New Zealand a little while ago. Made the analogy that it's really interesting too that the high jumper heptathlon is a really good combination. There's a lot of world class heptathletes, and you mentioned it the other day with that. What was the Italian girl? DiMartino, 204 and a former heptathlete. At 1.69 m tall, so she was, again, close to the world record height overhead. And then you've got, Nuffy Tiem, 202. You've got Katarina Johnson-Thompson's done 198. And I think that whole, that multiplanar piece seems to align well. Even, who was the Belgian girl?
That's exactly what I was thinking of. Tia, what was her last name? Tia something. Tia Hellebo.
Yeah, Hellebo, yeah. And she actually won the indoor pentathlon, the world champs indoor pentathlon, the same year she jumped 205. So again, there's, and I've got the same example in New Zealand. We've got, not in that league, but we've got 2 or 3 girls that are jumping over 185 that are heptathletes. It's like they're the best high jumpers in New Zealand because they have this multiplanar training. It's kind of fascinating.
Why do you think that is? And I think because this is where I wanted to ask you this question because I think there's inferences for just any sport and to some degree, obviously I'm not going to take like a pro football player and say, hey, in the off season, go do the decathlon. But you watch a lot of these players training, you see those shades of those elements and skills in there. And so I think the key is if it's just general physical preparation is looking at some of these outputs of athleticism that extend beyond the weight room and saying, all right, well, what do I want to piece together? Because obviously, like you said, for those heptathletes, like they do the heptathlon, their high jump skyrockets. But I do want to ask you, why do you think it's not so much the case for the men? Like, I don't think there's been any. I mean, the Christian Schenk, in the 90s, a little bit of an anomaly, but I don't think besides that, there's really any men in the decathlon.
There was another one, Jagan Hames. I don't even remember him. He was an Aussie guy. He jumped. I think he was world junior champion in the high jump, and he later scored just under 8.5. I think he might have won Com Games perhaps, in the decathlon. But yeah, 1 or 2, but as you say, very rare. I'm not quite sure why that is. I think I wouldn't have a good answer to that, to be fair. I mean, obviously there's only 7 events, there's 10 events, less specialized, and I think the diversity between 100 meters and a 1500 meters is a lot more than a 200 and 800. So your training is a lot more. So I think there's a bit more of that compromise, and you're more of a generalist in the decathlon. You're on a heptathlon, I would say.
It's almost the decathlon almost spreads it out too much. And the one thing I was just thinking of when you said junior record holder, I was trying to remember how there was a decathlete. He went to Texas. His name was Donovan. I can't remember his last name, but he was like the high school leader in high school. I think he had the best high jump and pole vault. This is when I was graduating, so it was like around 2002. I'd have to go look up his last name. But then he got to college, started doing the strength training, started putting on muscle mass, and of course his high jump goes down. So I almost wonder if the muscle mass as well, men carrying more muscle mass, also influences that compared to females. Less events, less muscle mass, more elastic by nature.
One less throw as well. Females don't have to contend with, so there's all those things. Potentially.
Yeah. So with the decathlon, I kind of have this idea in my head, like the decathlon principle, in the sense of what could be applied for any event, like almost this catalog of same but different skills to be good at if you want to be good at one thing. And like you said, the heptathletes, and especially like DiMartino, like when she stopped doing the heptathlon, it's like her high jump went up like 4 centimeters a year until she jumped an insane height. And so, do you have any thoughts on how, like, just any training situation, like with some of those things in mind, might play into how you would look at arranging training, not trying to overly specialize, like finding other more general skills to complement?
I think there's a lot of good ideas there. And I think part of it is, and I've sort of talked to different people about this before, I think training in multiple planes, which by definition, you've got to rotate to throw the shot put, you've got to, you've got internal hip rotation with the hurdles. You've got all these other bits and pieces that are going on. I think that sort of multi-skilled, multi-planar training. And if I'm still an advocate that the trunk and the spinal engine piece is a component of running, and a reasonably significant component of running. And so with that in mind, these guys are training that stuff by definition. They're doing medicine ball throws. They're doing all these things with different movements. And we get sort of hyper-specialized, and then you lose other elements like perhaps some of that conditioning that you would otherwise have had. I think the other thing is we get stuck on, and I certainly was guilty of this myself. I had a reasonably traditional physiology background in my undergraduate training, and we know that volume of work is not a good thing for fast twitch muscle, and so you get hyper specialized and you don't do all this stuff. But in contrast, volume of work probably is really good for your connective tissue and your fascial stuff and your tendons. And so perhaps the multi-event is, and this is one of the things that I was writing a couple of notes when you had some of those ideas to talk about. It's fascinating to me that we've got decathletes on the scene that can run 10.2 in the 100 meters, and they can run close to 4 minutes in the 1500 meters.
So crazy.
And it's like, well, metabolically, that doesn't seem viable. But they're doing it, Ashton Eaton 10:21 and 4:14, Curtis Beechman 10:52 and 3:59. These are there's what's Delermy, the guy now he's on 10:2 and 45 low and 4:12 or something like that. I mean, these are phenomenal things across the sort of metabolic spectrum that they can do, close to world class across a multitude of events. And I wonder whether there's an efficiency piece which is garnered from volume. They by definition, they've got to do volume to train these different events. They bounce a lot. They train the spatial system. They train the spinal engine piece, and they have this efficiency and an ability to go all day, which for a team sport athlete, that's the ultimate team sport athlete. And I sort of coined this phrase. We've got rugby sevens as a big thing in New Zealand for the Olympic program, and to my mind, rugby sevens players, are combat decathletes. They have this combat element, but they have multitude of. They've got to be fast. They've got to be agile. They've got to be coordinated, and they've got to be able to run all day. And so having that sort of an Ashton Eaton in there that had a 10:2 speed and 4 minutes low in the 1500 meters, like that's the ultimate guy, isn't it? Like that's what you want. And so taking that stuff from the multi-event thing of training multiple planes, do a lot of stuff with bouncing, be strong around the hips as well as the trunk. There's a lot to like there that sort of arguably applies across certainly the team sport element, and do plyometrics, do jumping, do et cetera, all those things that decathletes have to do by nature. Kind of makes a lot of sense, and perhaps we get too sold on if you're an American football player, you're only going to do 5-second efforts. Well, we get big and strong, and we don't train those special elements the same way, or the spinal engine piece the same way. Maybe that's a mistake. And if you've got to play a game over a number of hours, well, again, you want to be conditioned to do that. So it's just interesting. Yeah,
you mentioned with like the rugby sevens, I think it is. I just like thinking of a sport as your own decathlon. Like, and even if you're training rugby sevens, like looking at all the key things that they need to do, and maybe in the off season making a decathlon. Hey, we're going to do this test, and you get this many points for it. Hey, we do this test, you get this many points for this. A guy I used to work with, Ty Leash. He training Kings football. We came up with a little like decathlon table for just the 40-yard dash, standing broad jump, and bench for the football team, and the kids absolutely loved it. Like, it's like points, and you have more events. There's so much fun with those tables, and I just think that if nothing else, it's a competition. It's kind of gets those juices flowing, but then you also, the more relevant those things can be, then it just works itself out really well for that I guess that feeling of the decathlon. Like, I try to quantify what that is and what that means for a sport.
Yeah. I did actually just randomly a similar thing with I had a heptathlete that had snapped a couple of metatarsals in her foot, and she'd done the Lisfranc ligament and all these major issues in her foot. And so we came up with a one-legged heptathlon, and it was a conditioning thing, again, with scoring tables. And I recruited a whole lot of other athletes to do it with her, and we had hopping and hopping for speed and all this sort of stuff in there. It was quite cool. But yeah, that stuff it's really engaging, and I tried to make it as close to her, so she'd score almost what she'd score on the.
Oh, nice.
She was a 6,000 point heptathlete, and trying to put all that stuff in. So yeah, it kind of works quite well.
Yeah,
it's certainly motivating.
Yeah, especially with training. I one topic I really have that just has been growing on me for who knows how long now, a decade, but like play-based training. And I mean, that to me, like a scoring table, like it's like, it would be one thing. All right, we're going to do testing week, and here's the key tests, and here's what they measure. But then you throw scores behind each of them, and it's like, yes, like a band or like an award or something like that. I mean, it just really ignites
it's awesome. I recruited a whole lot of people that weren't injured to do the heptathlon against it, and we had a ball. Like, there was, you can imagine the banter and the it was awesome. Yeah, a lot of fun. And as you say, you bring joy into a training system. Joy is a thing. It actually, you get a better adaptations. People are having fun. They want to come to training. There's this different hormonal response, whatever it is. Like, I think certainly in our system, we get a lot of people that are stuck on the spreadsheet. You're doing this, and we're doing this, and we've got to get this. It's like, where's the fun? Where's the joy? And you can have the best technical training program in the world, but if you don't have any joy in it, that's problematic too. I think there's a balance there. You have to be doing the right things, but you got to have a good time doing it too. Because people spend too much time training to have a shit time. Just like, well, come on, that's not going to work.
Yeah. An interesting test you could do, I kind of with like rules applied. Like, I was just thinking about the heptathletes who are so good at high jump, and like you said, their upper limit's 800 meters, which a lot of people look at. I mean, it is an endurance. It has a strong endurance component, but it's also massive with still speed and elasticity. And I almost think that a good test would be relevant to jumping ability and elasticity would be, how fast is your 800 meters, but you can't train more than, I don't know, 10 miles a week or something. There's a cap on how much you can train endurance for that. It's like, how good is your 800 in light of not having done a whole lot of distance? And
that's right. Yeah. And then becomes an efficiency piece on how well you bounce. What's your economy like? Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of interesting. One of the athletes that I'm working with currently is a marathon runner, and which is unusual for me. I don't tend to stick down the speed, power, engine spectrum. But the thing that's blown me away with her is, she's ran her first marathon in December, ran 2:26, so she's pretty good. But her elastic properties are unbelievable.
Yeah,
like her drop jump. She's, if you're doing RSI on the drop jump, she's 113 milliseconds as her contact time. Like, better than 90% of sprinters. It's crazy.
Wow.
And it's kind of like, and I'm not sure. I haven't seen any VO2 data for her. I'm not sure metabolically how amazing she is, but I suspect she's hyper efficient. Like, her efficiency would be really high. Is her metabolic VO2 stuff absolutely world class? I'm not sure, but certainly I would imagine her efficiency is really good. That she can probably run at a high percentage of her VO2 and maintain that, just because she bounces superbly, which is kind of like, oh, well, that's cool. Like, that's your gift. And on the same token, I guess it's kind of interesting. Like, the Lance Armstrong piece, when he went to the marathon, he was pretty shit, wasn't he? Right? He was struggling to break 3 hours, and here's a guy that had an 80-something mil VO2. And albeit the blood doping and everything else, but that aside, 80-something mil VO2, he could barely break 3 hours for the marathon. He might have got down to 240 odd or whatever. But this was the guy that was the goat of road cycling. He didn't bounce well. He trained not to bounce for his whole life by doing, concentric only cycling. He went across to the marathon, which you think, oh shit, this is going to be interesting. Is he going to run 210? No, he was a good club athlete, and I think that's a fascinating piece, that whole ability to bounce is more critical than probably people give it credit for.
Yeah, yeah, I'd seen that even too with like you see it more often than you'd think. Like high jumpers in college in the United States, high jumpers in college who also did cross country in high school. I remember when I first started coaching, I was like, I had a guy who had jumped 203 or 6'8" in high school and didn't play. I think he played basketball recreationally and did cross country. And I'm just thinking to myself, oh, as soon as this guy gets away from cross country and, lifts and I get, he did get better, but not to the degree that you would outright think if it's like, oh, you did cross country, and Dan Bach had said Jump Science when he was on the podcast, measuring the RSI of cross country runners was surprisingly high, just all those contacts. And I even think, I'm not telling people to go out and run, 20, 30, 40 miles a week for speed and power, but I'm more thinking, and another thing with cross country though, is like the variability. It reminds me of Jake Tura had said that like with horse studies, it was like the horse that was in the pen or the animal in the pen, like the tendons were not good. The animal that got run around like a set track, its tendons were like kind of strong. But the animal that got to free play and run all over the pasture and do whatever they wanted and all the train and probably the joy that came with it had the best tendons. And I think, well, if you were going to run cross country is way better than just running around a track for all that stuff,
Totally. Yeah. And so I've probably changed my tune a little bit on being the minimal effective dose Nazi to going, okay, well, maybe there is this element of this, the special stuff is really important. And when you look at those decathletes that can run 10-2 and 4-10, like, well, clearly it's not just fiber type. And there's a whole element of, elastic properties that go with that it's, and probably that fascia is trained by repetition.
Yeah.
That's a mantra you hear from some people, and it's probably right. And so, there's that. You don't want to compromise the fiber type so much and enhance it that you become a marathon runner, but you want to find that balance where there's probably a sweet spot that optimizes global performance, especially in a team sport context. And it's probably, there's a reasonable amount of bouncing in there. And again, I would stress that the bouncing should be multiplanar. It's not just, and whilst the fascia is connected, bounce on the feet's one thing, but need some balls, rotating, throwing, all that stuff should be part of it too.
Today's podcast is sponsored by the Plyomat. The Plyomat is not only an incredible vertical jump and reactive strength index testing device, but it also is an incredible training device. The Plyomat not only allows single response jumps, but also the chaining of multiple mats together, so you can use it for bounding, multiple series of hurdle hops. You can get not only height, but reactive strength for a multi-jump situation. It's an incredible, again, testing and training tool, and you can learn more at plyomat.net. Yeah, for sure. I think back to when I was prior to probably 8th or 9th grade, my dad did just fun running, like distance running, just hopped in like a couple mile races. And so of course I saw him and I was always just someone who loved to move. So I'm like, yeah, I want to run too. But I also of course love jumping high and all those things. And then one of my training programs, my sophomore year, age 15 or 16, was like, don't distance run because, it's bad for your twitch or whatever. And honestly, I almost think that it was the perfect time for me because, and I played all the sports too, but it's almost like I did get like that good elastic base, but then, okay, now it's time to actually like, train speed and power. And I remember my senior year of high school, doing basketball, dual sport basketball and track. And of course you got the free play in basketball and that aerobic load was just, massive for me. And I remember one time we were running repeat 400s for practice, and again, this isn't fast for a lot of people, but I basically like jogged to 60 for the first one. I was like, that was easy, let's go number.
Just bouncing around. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I bounced it, and I'm like, that is what I want. And so even this summer in the training programs I was distributing for a lot of my athletes, because I kind of started doing this myself. I'm like, I think this is a good thing. Is let's warm up with an 800. Like RPE 7, what's the time? That's about the extent of our distance running, but it's there. And if you suck at that, you probably, it just kind of organically gives you something to work on,
Yeah. Well, no, I think there's a lot of value in that. Yeah, really good.
Yeah. So I did with the jumping and the like triple jump. I think your wife is a triple jumper, and you had along the lines of elasticity, because this takes us into foot strength a little bit. You had a really cool anecdote of or maybe she was a multi-eventer, but she wanted to get into triple jump, and you had some work with the foot and
Yeah.
EMS. Tell me a little bit about that story. I thought that was really interesting.
So my wife was, she was a 2012 Olympian in the heptathlon, and this is 5, 6, 7 years later. Decided, okay, I want to, and maybe even 10 years later when I think about it. But regardless, she wanted to. I'm going to go compete at track and field nationals in New Zealand, and so she was. She'd been exercising but hadn't been training. She'd been keeping moderately fit. She likes being fit as a former heptathlete, but certainly not what you would call structured training. And then so the New Zealand season is obviously your winter, but so we have a season from about November through till March. So about August, she decided, I'm going to do triple jump this year. Never really triple jump much. She did a little bit once or twice, a couple of comps. Started training sort of relatively traditionally, strength training, bounding, running, sprinting, etc. Hurt her back, sacrum, lower back injury, and so she couldn't lift, she couldn't run, and she couldn't bound or jump, which makes it reasonably difficult to do triple jump, obviously. And so she still wanted to do it. Okay, so let's see what we come up with. And so we came up with this two things there in it. One was the foot strength piece that you alluded to. We used a complex stimulator. We were doing foot and calf stimulation on alternate days. So she'd do high intensity calf stimulation on one day. Then the next day we'd do it on the foot. We just have it on the ball of the foot and the heel of the foot, and cranking that up. And quite uncomfortable, to quite an uncomfortable level, but doing it every day. So that was one piece of it. We did. She could do isometric holds, so we did some of the long lunges and we did some of those other pieces. But we also did speedball, which is kind of one of those things that if you haven't done speedball before, you look at it and you think it's a bloody ridiculous notion. Why the hell would anybody do speedball? It's metabolically totally dissimilar to running. But that's the anecdotal evidence behind speedball with the Scottish pro sprinters back in the day. And Alan Wells, there was another guy, George McNeil, he ran 11.14, I think, in 1970 for 120 yards.
Oh, wow.
That's 109.73 meters. So it's effectively 10.15 in 1970.
Yeah.
In the middle of a Scottish winter in bloody Glasgow or somewhere. Like, unbelievable. Like, in those days, that wasn't too far off the world record. Some skinny little white dude from Scotland. And anyway, and when you go into the sort of historical stuff, there's a lot of these guys that ran really fast. Guys coming in running 12 seconds for the 100 meters at 19, doing speedball for a number of years and end up running 10.2, 10.3. It's like, what? That just doesn't happen. That's not a thing. So anyway, long story short, my wife did this period. We did 3 months of the speedball, calf stimulation, isometric holds. And she's a hard ass. She was doing it 6 days a week, 6 3-minute rounds of speedball, a little bit of a bodyweight circuit with the isometric stuff in there, and then the calf and foot stuff every day. And ironically, at 37 or 38 years of age, after two kids, she came out with no running. We think we had 3 running sessions, and she ran a lifetime best or equal lifetime best for a flying 10-meter time.
Oh, wow.
And it was like, what? So it made me a bit of a believer in the speedball piece, and I've certainly been beating the speedball drum ever since. And obviously we did a whole lot of components of that, and but given speedball to a lot of athletes, almost always they get better. And people listen to this and go, "Oh, that's bullshit." Doesn't make. I know I've heard it before. Oh, that can't be. It doesn't make any sense. And whether it's the spinal engine piece because you're kind of rotating. It's kind of like we sort of talked before about the isometric holds when you're doing in this horrible level of fatigue and discomfort you get to, you learn stuff.
Yeah. Because
you go, well, how can I hold this position? All these motor units are dying on me. Oh, I tweak that. I push down with my toe a bit more or whatever. I get I slightly change it, and I had this motor learning sensation that's going on. I think the same thing occurs with speedball. You can do about a minute just bashing it with your arms. After a minute, if you're doing a 3-minute round, your arms blow out like when you swim for the first time for a long time, your delts blow out. Yes. Same sort of thing. And then you have to start using your trunk to do it, and that's when the magic happens. And I think it doesn't even have to be coached. You just do it, and you have to figure out a way your body will intuitively find a way to do it. So yeah, I've become a bit of an advocate. We've got them in most of our high performance gyms in New Zealand. We've got Speedballs, which we didn't have 2 or 3 years ago. People are using it. High jumpers get better with it too. I don't know why that is, but again, maybe it's that whole, you do thousands of repetitions of Speedball, you're chaining these special slings. Is that what it is? I don't know, but I'm a believer, and not quite a zealot yet, or but the cult of Speedball, maybe, I don't know, but there's certainly something in it.
And, not quite ready to be a cult leader of Speedbag, but I'm really looking around my basement here of some good places to put one up. I used to do Speedbag a lot. There was one when I was at Cal, and I did it a lot. I really liked it, and it does make sense too. I've just talked about this on a recent podcast. Darian Barr was the first person to teach me, like, the hands are connected to the feet. Like when you watch someone doing something, a jump or whatever, there's different hand alignments and positions that tell you what the feet are trying to do. And I think kind of too, in some ways, we have so many nerve endings in our hands. Like it's almost like the body can steal some nervous, like, I don't know, like some sensation, some quickness.
And I wonder, do you remember that old the ESDN video of Adam Archuleta way back in the day that got everybody excited? And he's training on that inertial impulse device, doing those
yes.
There's a contract relax piece, high speed contract relax. Well, that's people too. You're turning on and off, on and off. And I wonder whether there's probably a multitude of things that are going on there. But is there a nervous system piece? Is there a facial piece? Is there a spinal engine piece?
Yeah.
Probably all of the above. So yeah, kind of interesting.
Yeah, actually, something I'm going to try. I'm like, I have like some of my equipment here sitting right in front of me. I have one of those tsunami bars the oscillation. When you have weights on the end, it actually oscillates kind of slow. But if no weights are on, it's fast. It's like super tight. So I'm actually going to I think after this, I'm going to go for like a minute and just as fast as I can, just chest press even, just see what happens. Prime it before the next speed session.
There's something with that stuff. I'm not quite sure whether it's a reflex thing or what it is, but people get better with doing it. They get better. And I keep seeing it, and people don't believe it. And you have to do a volume of work. Again, maybe it's that nervous system or facial piece or whatever it is. You can't just do it 2 lots of 30 seconds once a day. Expect, it's the original Jim Bradley, who was the guy that pioneered it, was 6 times 3-minute rounds for 3 months. And it's like, that's a shitload of work. That's a lot of hits. That's a lot of contractions. And I guess the other piece, there's a whole lot of things that could be going on. One of the other things, they didn't run during that time.
Oh,
they did not run. And so I wonder whether you come from this competition season, you're doing running, bounding, and everything else. You don't run for 3 months. Perhaps you get a fiber type, rebound and overshoot in your legs, the prime levers, while you're still training the fascial swings. So it becomes this double whammy that you come out running really fast because you haven't degraded. You've optimized the fiber type, but still maintained the fascial system. I don't know. I'm just spitballing. There's a whole lot of ideas going around in my mind about why it might work, but obviously there's no research on it, so I don't know.
Yeah, well, hey, it's my favorite. I don't know if this is a bad thing, but one of my favorite places is that initial speculation phase. Hey, there should be a research project on this or that or the other thing, and
100%.
I like even when I'm doing my sprints a lot of times, and I feel like this is facilitated by like the Exogen microweights because it kind of pulls on different limbs. But but to try to feel like to go from 80% to 100% speed, what changes? Because it doesn't happen because, well, I'm just going to swing my arms harder. Well, that didn't do it. It comes from a central location, like somewhere kind of below the belly button. So something, you can say like the spinal engine or something that's in the center is initiating this increased speed. Well, what is that initial thing? And I mean, with the speed bag, it is the arms, but you think behind the arms going really fast is the center vibrating really fast. Something has to go faster. And so it's like just tuning the center to just, and I think something that's so cool too that, 2 things that I think are really cool is one, you mentioned like learning that is innate or like there's fatigue, right? Like the ISOs you said, like
fatigue is your teacher. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I think that's so underrated because we're all ready to jump in. Oh, do this, do that. It's like, I don't know, like, just do it till it's kind of tiring and then figure it out, figure
it out. Yeah. Find a way, and your body will find a way.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is that as you try and go faster with the speed bag or speedball, your rhythm gets out of whack, and it goes. And so there's it's speed with relaxation is this other thing that comes out of it. And it's like, this whole rhythm, relaxation, coordination, finding a way to without toe contracting and fighting yourself. All of that stuff is rehearsed, and the ball just bounces all over the place. If you don't hit it straight, it goes all over the place. You get this instant feedback again without coaching. It coaches you, and so it's a beautiful piece of kit that, in my mind, that inherently does all these things. I'm not sure these Scottish guys knew why it worked. They just knew it worked, and as a coach, if it works, it works. They're like, who cares? But I want to know a little bit more mechanistically, and I feel like there's a whole lot to be dug into there, and there's probably 5 or 6 different things that it could be, and maybe it's a mixture of all 5 or 6, but maybe it's 1 or 2 key factors that are part of it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, one thing I was just thinking of too that is interesting that could mix in is I think, and I'm a little bit on this kick of like looking at training in the 70s and 80s, or even you go back to like the early strongmen of the 1900s where people had to be creative. You had to, hey, I got this thing. I don't have a huge battery of things, but I got a few pieces of tools, and I'm going to pick one and kind of creatively, intuitively work with what I have. Yeah. It's almost like a creative cultural thing in some ways. Hey, I'm making do. It's cold outside. Let's really get this going.
That's right.
And
that's right. Yeah. And I'll become next level at this thing that I can do.
Yeah.
And how does that transfer to X, Y, and Z? And like in this case, because that was the thing. In Scotland, snowed in the winter. They had no indoor facilities. They trained in a little shed. What can we do? Oh, we can put a speedball up and hit that and do a bodyweight circuit. And guess what? They got really bloody fast. Crazy. In the so the Commonwealth Games, obviously not familiar to a lot of your listeners perhaps, but there's 105 nations that do the Commonwealth Games, something like that. And in 1982, in the men's 100 meter, and usually these days it's in the sprints, it's the African, Caribbean, couple of Canadians that dominate the sprints at the Commonwealth Games typically. But in 1982, first place in 10:02 wind assisted was Alan Wells. Second place, so white Scottish guy. Second place was Ben Johnson, ran 10:05 or so. And third place was another white Scottish guy, Cameron Sharp, whose daughter's Lindsay Sharp, now an 800 meter runner, world-class runner as well. But what the hell's going on there? 2 guys from a cold little country, in the top of the United Kingdom, getting first and third in the 100 meters, running 10:0. And you look at it, and they both trained with Speedball. They both did these sort of counterintuitive things, and they ran fast. So and there's a multitude of examples that I'm not going to go into all now, but I sort of wrote a document about all this stuff of trying to, for my own benefit, really. But yeah, there's the anecdotal evidence is compelling, whilst the theoretical stuff is kind of like what's going on. The anecdotal evidence is compelling.
Yeah. I kind of thinking about those Scottish guys. What if they had, on top of it, they had the EMS for the foot and calf too? So then you're really, that's going to round it out like what you're doing, Maybe we could close this out too, because you mentioned the isometric holds with your wife as well. Like, the triangle of power. You got the speed bag, you got the foot and calf EMS, and the ISO holds. And tell me a little bit about that too. And I know you spent time, you're really immersed in that and Jay Schrader's stuff, and people who have taken on Jay Schrader's work. What's your thought process on that? Like, should we bust out 10-minute holds and just go for it? Like, how do we? Yeah, look, how do we?
I think there is something in that. There's a whole lot of, and I thought about this mechanistically too. Like, what the hell is going on there? Because there is something positive that occurs by doing these long duration holds, and it is somewhat counterintuitive. And as you say, it's like you're trying to do a 5-minute isometric lunge. You'll give yourself a migraine. Like it's hard work. It's and maybe that's because you haven't developed the postural awareness or whatever it is. But nonetheless, it's hard. And it's hard and it's not fun. People don't like it. People stop doing it. But if you think about what could potentially be happening, one of the things is we know with these prolonged stretching, and we certainly know in animal models, that you can add sarcomeres in series, which are the contractile elements of muscle, through these prolonged weighted holds, whatever. So you add sarcomeres in series. This is another way of increasing contractile speed. There's an additive effect of sarcomeres in series on contractile speed. So you haven't changed fiber type, but you've added sarcomeres in series. There's theoretically an additive effect on speed. You'll be able to contract that muscle faster. Okay, so let's say we do that. Let's say that occurs and you get this additive effect of contractile speed. The beautiful thing, again, for the team sport scenario, my combat decathletes and sevens, and I don't even work with sevens, but I think it's sevens rugby, but this is in my mind. You have improved the contractile speed of muscle, and you haven't made it less oxidative by changing fiber type. So you're faster, and you've maintained the oxidative capacity of muscle. Win-win. You're still able to do repeatability stuff, and you can still. Okay, cool. That's pretty interesting. The second piece that mechanistically could be going on, I think there's Goldspink maybe, or one of those guys from the 70s or 80s. They did those studies with the weighted limbs of animals and birds and what have you. They wear a weight thing for a month. And that's our real only evidence of hyperplasia, which is, not adding hypertrophy, increase in muscle fiber. So hyperplasia is an increase in number of fibers. Extreme interventions for extreme adaptations. Is that what the extreme ISO is? It's an extreme intervention. Maybe you're getting hyperplasia in these key muscle groups. Hip flexors, glutes, hamstring, whatever it is, that make you morph you into a better specimen for running fast or whatever it is. Look, I think there is something in it. I don't think you need to. And one of the things I think Jerome Simeon said to me, he said when athletes get experience, they start off, they do these 5-minute holds and they do these things. But once they get to a certain level, they don't need to do 2 minutes. And it's kind of like you're just tapping the wheel now. You're maintaining those qualities that you've developed by doing this chronic overload stuff. You do enough to maintain it, but not enough to completely ruin your day and give you complete exhaustion and whatever else. So that's kind of an interesting idea. But look, I think there is the motor learning piece. Under fatigue, you learn some stuff. You learn how to control these muscles. You learn how to the subtleties of that. There's potential the sarcomeres and series piece, and there's potentially the hyperplasia piece. Again, I'm being highly speculative on those latter two perhaps, but there's something that goes on which is positive. And Jerome's words ring in my ears. I said, how do you periodize this stuff? Do you go from the long duration isos to sort of the bouncing, jumping into your Russian lunge, or how do you do it? And he certainly does do the altitude drops and all that other stuff. But he sort of said I keep them in, right? Because as the line was something like, I take them out and they get worse, so I keep them in. Like, hard to argue with that. But obviously he can modify it when his elite guys have been doing it for a few years, that you don't need to do the 5 minutes. You just need to tap the wheel and maintain it with a 2-minute effort or whatever. But nonetheless, it's interesting stuff. And again, it's one of those things that doesn't look good on your Instagram. It doesn't look good on the thing. It's not fun. But how good do you want to get? Like extreme adaptations to extreme, demands. There's something in it.
Yeah, I totally agree. For me, it's kind of become a little bit of a ceiling and a basement. Like 2 minutes, right? Like my basement's usually like 1:30. Like, I should at least be able to do that for most of the year. But it's like the ceiling. It's like, I think for anything to me mentally, the ceiling is hard to maintain. Like 5 minutes. Like I remember 2-3 summers ago, I was going. I decided, all right, every day I'm going to start every workout with a lunge, and it's going to be at least 3:30. And a few of those were 5. And I just remember one week, I'm like, I don't think I want to do this anymore. Like it's just mentally, just to generate that, okay, here we go again, and if you can just think, all right, you know what, if I can do 2 and get 80% of the benefits and not the last 20 and then go do the rest of my workout, like, all right, like we're cooking now.
I guess the other good thing with it is too, that there's that parasympathetic piece. We know that prolonged stretching gives you a parasympathetic boost, if you like. And I know Jerome was certainly using HRV, and the days after they're done, that their HRV was better. So okay, cool. That's interesting. There's probably something, and you don't, because it's not brutally disruptive in terms of the shock type stuff. You don't get massive DOMs from it. Once you're accustomed to it, it's just the thing you do. You maintain these lengths. Perhaps given that sarcomeres and series piece. People come out of it and they tend to run well, and it's interesting.
Yeah, I've even found that. Now, I'd be curious with a 5, and I do think it would actually go up, but I will test grip strength in intra-workout. So, and I found like before the workout, it's whatever, like let's say it's 170 pounds, and then I go do the iso lunge for 3 minutes, and it's like 175, 176, and that's literally all I did. And if it wasn't for that, it would not be 175, 176. So it's funny. It's like, well, it's this endurance thing, right? Air quote. It's like, there's something else going on. If it took your grip strength up 6, that's good. Even if you're going to sprint after, there's something going on there. That's certainly, I've always found the same thing. The next day, especially, like, even if it's a long hold, you feel good. So I agree with what you said too. I just think it's so important. It's like I think a lot about where is training gone, the internet age, attention through novelty. And it's nice to have something that, this kind of sucks and it's not that cool. Just do it. It's good to have.
Always like Stu McMillan had that thing that he was doing. He called it embrace the suck. Some of the stuff is going to be hard. Some of the stuff is building mental resilience. It's you have to embrace that and be the guy that does it, or girl that does it, and then you're getting an edge perhaps, and thinking it in those terms, and even that's helpful emotionally, I reckon.
Yeah. That's part of the reason I like doing it first. It's almost like you pay the toll. Like, hey, your gateway is, do something that just, it's not like, it doesn't get to the point where it's like, you need to think of like these just brutal conditioning workouts that just wreck you. It doesn't get to that point, but it's just something where you have to, I think the stillness of it is the thing that fits well also. And I also think something too with it is that it's something that can be kind of like a threshold. Like you mentioned Jerome's group. It's almost like whatever time is in your mind. It's like, hey, everyone, once you get the 4, it's like the people who had to do the horse stance for like 10 minutes before they were allowed to train at the dojo. You have to do the threshold, and now you're good. Now you're cool. Like, I'm not advocating for like it, brutal workouts, but in the sense that it's not going to hurt you. Like an ISO hold is not gonna. You can't mess that up. It's just difficult. It's not like like a CrossFit workout you weren't ready for that gives you rhabdo. It's just something that's
no, that's right. It's not. It's totally not that.
Yeah.
So absolutely.
What were just closing out? I was curious what were the time parameters for your wife in that? That I'll call it the triangle of power: the foot, the speed bag, and the isos. What were the time parameters there?
So in a session, you mean?
Just generally, like when you were doing the whole.
So it was we did 3 months. She probably built up to. I don't think she ever got beyond the 3-minute isos and the holds, but it probably built. But 3 months of speedball every day, six times 3-minute rounds, maybe 6 days a week, 6 to 7 days a week. We would vary that a little bit with every third or fourth week we do 6 1-minute rounds rather than the 3-minute rounds and count it 70 hits you get for speed. More as a emotional thing than anything. The ISO stuff I think we built up to maybe 3 minutes. And she didn't enjoy those very much, but she did it. We did some core stuff that we could do without hurting her back. The complex stuff we would just do every night was just a standard program. I think we used the explosive strength program on the old school complex. I think it's like 20 minutes. Back on the car, both cars. She could do it with watching TV. We'd put a 25k plate on her knees, and it would. The first time we did it, I think I probably said this to you when I was over there. We didn't have anything on her knees, and she basically went to this tetanus, cramp type feeling, and I just started laughing, and we nearly got divorced that day because it's uncomfortable. So you need to have something that's loading it so that when you do go into a contraction, it's not just getting shorter and shorter and shorter and feeling like a cramp. That was a good learning. But and then so we did that. We did that every day, alternating the 20 minutes either on the foot or the calf. Again, that was probably 6 days a week. She probably had 1 day off doing not much. So
I was going to say it's one thing for the ninja master to make the students do a 10-minute horse stance. It's another for one spouse to make another certain ISO. Oh man. Oh, good stuff, Angus. Well, hey, awesome stuff today, man. I always really enjoy these conversations. I have so many ideas, and I also I'm looking for spaces for a speed bag now. So I really appreciate it.
Makes a lot of noise as part of the problem. But
I got to think about that.
It'll vibrate the whole house, but that's all right.
Yeah, with the new baby, that might not be good. I might have to wait. On that one. Or maybe outside. I don't know.
I'll have to put it outside somewhere. Or
Yeah, awesome. Well, sounds good. Well, thank you again, Angus. I really appreciate your time on the show today.
No, good as gold. Okay, thanks, Joel.
That finishes another show. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.